Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome to Hour 3 of the program today. I welcome Josh Hammer, senior editor at National Review and the author of this brand new and riveting book, Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. Josh is a first-time guest. Welcome, Josh. Good to see you and meet you in person.
Hugh, it's great to see you, good sir. Longtime fan of your work. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss the book with you.
Well, I want to tell you that you had me, you lost me, you got me back, and there's lots to talk about. And so I got to tell everyone there's a lot in this book. Israel and Civilization truly is a cri de core. But I want to start with the most interesting fact of many interesting facts and people I've never heard of. Obviously, I'm Christian, you're Jewish. There's a lot of evidence that you put it into the record so people can understand it, but it's new to me. This fact I think everyone is going to find amazing. Between October 7th and December 25th of 2023, that's after the massacre, obviously, more than 270,000 Israelis applied for new gun licenses. During the same time period, armed civilian rapid response team expanded in number from 70 to 900. You know, Josh, that in itself is a story that everyone ought to understand, that you don't want to be caught out when evil arrives.
Hugh, I devote 2,000 words in this chapter towards the end of the book about the need for Jews to train with firearms. I've been very passionate about this for a very, very long time. It's one of my great frustrations in general that more American Jews are politically liberal, but maybe above all the fact that they just reject firearm culture, when in reality, the Second Amendment is really the great equalizer. I mean, what is the famous quote from Samuel Colt of Colt Firearms? He said that God made man, and then Sam Colt made them equal. There, I think very often about this quote. I think I quoted actually in the book. There was this famous line from Judge Alex Kaczynski of the Ninth Circuit, going back to this firearms case out of California back in 2003, and he describes the Second Amendment as a doomsday provision, as one that you never know when it's going to be necessary there. And I think often about that, Hugh, in the context of October 7th. I mean, I've been to those kibbutzim, those small communities there in the Gaza envelope. You know, what if Kibbutz Be'eri, what if Kfar Aza, what if these tiny communities actually had firearms? What if they knew what they were talking about? What if they took the opening line of Psalms chapter 144, that you shall train my fingers for war? What if they actually took this seriously? And it's not necessarily the civilians' fault. The Israeli government has been far too restrictive, frankly, when it comes to firearm ownership. But there has been a bit of a sea change there. Itamar Ben-Gvir has been very much pushing the envelope when it comes to trying to get more firearms in the hands of more Israelis there. And I applaud that as an American, as a Jew, as a constitutional, as someone who carries his own firearm, myself, every day, and as someone who very much
you
values.
You point out you learned it. Was it the University of Chicago prompted you to get that, or when you moved to Texas? What was the prompt for you to go from non-gun owner to concealed carry guy?
Well, I lived in a lot of blue jurisdictions. I grew up in New York State. I lived in Washington, D.C. As you mentioned, I went to law school in Chicago. So I didn't have a whole lot of opportunities there. But after I graduated law school and moved to Texas, and I chose to move initially to Texas largely because it is a red state. It was a very simple reason when it comes to all that entails culturally, economically, and so forth there. I immediately wanted to take advantage. And even before my first law firm job started there in Houston, Texas, I immediately had gone out and gotten my concealed carry license there. I already had purchased my first rifle. It's the same Daniel Defense M4 that I still own today. I actually call that my Warsaw Ghetto gun, because to me, that's the exact kind of weapon that the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising would have loved to have had against the Nazis. Who knows what might have happened, of course, there. So I'm very passionate about this. I've written about this numerous times over the years. I truly wish that more Jews, more Americans in general, but maybe above all, I really do wish my fellow American Jews really would train with firearms and learn how to actually safely use and handle firearms.
Now, I want to compliment you on one thing. I've said for a long time, there are Christian Zionists who do not base their support of Israel on the fact that Jesus is a Jew or that the Torah is part of my scripture. No. I base it on the fact that Israel is a strategic ally of the United States that has nukes, that has our back, that we can count on, and is an economic engine of innovation. But not a lot of American Jews, and certainly not Israeli Jews, speak to the Gentile audience in America. I think a lot of Israel and Civilization is directed at my team, my people, like I had on Douglas Murray this week, who does a lot of the same thing. But he's a Gentile talking to Gentiles about Israel. You're a Jew talking to Gentiles about it. There's a lot in here for American Jews, but do you agree or disagree with me that American Jews tend to overlook the fact they got to talk to the Gentile audience a lot?
Hugh, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, one audience for this book is definitely my fellow Jews. The entire penultimate chapter, which is called the Maccabean Imperative, is really written directly to my fellow Jews, basically calling on Jews to actually be, as the book of Isaiah calls us to do, to be a light unto the nations, to actually observe the commandments, to own firearms, things like that there. But if there's one audience above all for this book, Hugh, it is Christians in America, because I see what's out there when it comes to trend lines. And thank God the fact that most Christians in America still remain overwhelmingly philo-Semitic, overwhelmingly supportive of Israel, especially evangelical Protestants and traditionalist Catholics there. But the polls are shifting a little bit. I'm sure you've seen them. The younger generation of Christians, not necessarily as reliably over the top pro-Israel as, for instance, the 1970s era moral majority, Jerry Falwell, people like that there. And I worry when I look at certain provocateurs out there. I worry about people like Candace Owens, Dan Bilzerian. Frankly, if I'm just being candid here, Tucker Carlson. I actually do worry about certain younger Christians being influenced by people who I view as trying to drive a wedge, trying to drive a chasm between the original people of the book, the original recipients of God's word, and the original disseminators of monotheism, and the people, the Christians, who actually built Western civilization off of that biblical foundation there. And we have to stand shoulder to shoulder, Hugh. That is the argument in this book. The argument is fundamentally calling for a Jewish Christian nationalist alliance to double down on our shared joint biblical inheritance. You know, Hugh, I'm an observant Jew. I don't have a whole lot of opportunities to actually pick up and hold a physical Christian Holy Bible, but I was actually in a library maybe about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and I did exactly that. And I was thumbing through. And to your point, if I'm not mistaken, it looks to me like what Christians call the Old Testament, what we call Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, is actually more than half of the Christian Bible. I think it's actually more pages. It's
Oh yeah,
longer
it's
than the New Testament.
75%. Oh yeah, it's 70
Right.
to 75%. But let's pause for a moment, Josh. One of my two areas of contention with you, I don't think Tucker belongs in the category with Candace and the other people. I think he actually did me a favor. I didn't know this Daryl Cooper guy was out there. I didn't even know we had a nut running around. Then he pops up on Rogan. So you can argue that Tucker's platform should not be open to the crazy anti-Semitic fringe, but he may not have known that he was a crazy anti-Semitic fringer, but I sure do now because of that. Candace on the other side and the other people who I do not know of, they're news to me. I read the names. Who are these people? Maybe I'm too old and too removed from the newest of new media. It's unnecessary to divide your friends. And my second example of that is Paul Ryan. And I want to give you the intellectual challenge. On page 38, you lay out the 7 Noahide laws. And you say, these are the 7 pillars of everything. And I agree. But later on, you blast Paul Ryan for asserting that there are universal values. How do you reconcile the fact that on page 38, there are these 7 laws that are the foundation of everything, and then you get forward to Paul Ryan who's talking about universal values and you don't like that?
A wonderful question. So I do place a very strong premium on the Noahide laws. Those are the 7 laws that apply not just to Jews, but to all of humanity there. Mostly common sense stuff, that thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not eat an animal in the live flesh without cooking it, and so forth there. Hugh, to me, there's a big distinction between believing in a notion of universal values, at least a universal baseline. Again, we're talking here about just 7 very kind of baseline laws there. But there's a big difference to me between believing in it and then believing in a conception of America's role on the world stage that seeks to spread by force, if need be, that conception to other lands there. That to me is really what's actually doing the work. I think a lot about this quote from John Quincy Adams that he gave before he was president, back when he was Secretary of State to President Monroe, and he gave this very famous speech. I'm sure you, as a very well-educated guy, that you will be familiar with it, where he says, "America does not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. We wish everyone our own, but we are ultimately the safeguarders, the protectors of liberty."
I saw you
only
quote
for
that, Josh, and I immediately wrote down. I put notes in the back of the book when I'm getting ready. There is no abroad anymore. That's the difference. And when W orders the invasion of Iraq, it's not neocon. It's because he genuinely believed they had WMD and were dangerous. I wish he'd kept going to Syria and Tehran. A lot more people would be alive today, but he didn't. The fact that Adams doesn't fit in this is because there is no abroad with hypersonic missiles that can reach us. If Iran gets a nuke, there is no abroad for anyone anywhere. But hypersonic missiles in China's arsenal, I mean, there is no abroad. So I don't think I've been a Reagan conservative. I'm not a neocon, but I do believe it's unnecessary. Why do you feel it's necessary to argue with the folks who were there after 9/11? Because it's just, I say the same thing, by the way, to my neocon friends who want to argue with the Trumpists. No, unite your friends, divide your enemies. That's the way to do this.
Yeah. Well, look, it's a very fair question, Hugh. Look, I have been vociferously critical of people like Tucker Carlson who seem to take a stridently isolationist, Ron Paul-like approach to foreign policy. To me, that is woefully misguided. But I do also think that Bush era neoconservatism is misguided. I think that history has for better or for worse proven that out there. But more to the point, you're talking here about chapter 7 of my book. I consider it to be one of the more important chapters where I make the
It's
case for
one of the more provocative chapters. I want people to, but it's well worth reading. It's very engaging.
I appreciate that. So this chapter makes the case for close-knit U.S.-Israel relations on explicitly MAGA, America First, foreign policy, realist grounds, whatever you want to call it there. And really what I'm trying to do above all, Hugh, is explain why Donald Trump himself, as a self-proclaimed realist, as someone who views the world basically views the world stage through the singular prism of the American national interest, why he has arrived at such a robustly pro-Israel conclusion. Because there are a lot of people out there that are trying to kind of thump their chest and say, I'm America first. I don't care about what happens in Israel. I don't care about the Middle East there. And I'm trying to kind of explain the logic of that. No, if you are a realist, if you properly view China as America's number one threat, I actually just filed my column for tomorrow morning on China. China is our number one threat, bar none, period, full stop, end of story. But America still has interests in the Middle East, Hugh. And the realists, therefore, should ask, how can America maximize its ROI, its return on investment, in a way whereby we can focus on China while ensuring that our actual real interests in the Middle East are nonetheless secured? And the obvious answer, which helps lead to these historical Abraham Accords peace deals orchestrated by President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, the answer is that you embolden your allies to patrol and secure the region in a way that redounds to both of your interests. And in that case, that really does mean above all the state of Israel.
That's why I think Trump and Nixon share a lot in common. Nixon is he said, send everything that can fly in the middle of the Yom Kippur War, because Israel was our ally and they were threatened by its enemies. And he said in part, in process, the peace process, which actually worked out in Camp David, not like the Oslo peace process. Uber realists understand that Israel is the strategic key to the Middle East. Let me ask you about this. I think most of our problems come down to one thing, and you bring up a lot of stuff I did not know. I knew George Washington was a Philo-Semite. I knew that Ben Franklin said. I didn't know about the John Adams quote. That was new to me, and I've been doing this for a long time. I am, however, amazed at how stupid the younger generation, millennials, I don't know what we call them now, Generation Alpha, they don't know that the temple's there. They don't know that the Parthenon's there. History is a stubborn thing. Facts are historic, and we can't read them out of the record. And you're doing a good work with Israel and civilization because you're putting facts on the record for people to deal with. Is that our biggest problem, that our education system is hopelessly broken?
Well, look, I really appreciate the kind words. So above all, Hugh, what I'm trying to do here is I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. Quite the opposite, actually. As a good Burkean conservative, as someone who believes that wisdom is embodied in tradition and good things are easily destroyed but very difficult to build, I'm not really trying to build anything, actually. I'm just trying to argue in favor of putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. I am looking back at the American founders. I'm looking back at the fact that the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia is inscribed not necessarily with Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics. No disrespect to Aristotle, I'm a fan of his in general, but it's inscribed with a quote from the book of Leviticus: "Thou shalt proclaim liberty all throughout the land." You mentioned the John Adams quote. Abraham Lincoln, I'm born on his birthday. He's my single favorite figure in all of American history. He famously speaks of America as an almost chosen people, using this covenantal language. He was about as philo-Semitic as it gets, Abraham Lincoln there. This Jewish-Christian biblical alliance forged Western civilization. It forged America in its infancy, and it's been one of the probably the single most important reason why Western civilization, in my view, is objectively superior to other civilizations that have come both before and after it, because we have this biblical foundation. So I'm really arguing just remember that which we have lost. If I had to pinpoint one thing above all that would get us back in order, yes, education is a big part of it. Don't get me wrong; that is a huge part of it there, but I mean, if I could snap my fingers, Hugh, and basically just get one social phenomenon out there, I would just want a new 21st century Great Awakening. To me, if you get more Christians in Bible believing churches, you get more Jews in Torah observant synagogues, that is the number one thing that will be the closest I could possibly think of to a panacea for virtually all of our woes when it comes to
Well,
despondency,
you're not
loneliness,
going to get an
depression.
argument from me on that, but I will say I'm not a Straussian. I'm not smart enough to be a Straussian. And you're obviously not a Straussian, though you might have a theory that rhymes with Straussian. But reason and revelation can indeed walk together, and they can indeed walk together in a church, in a synagogue, in a mosque. It can walk together anywhere if we treat history right. So I want to end with a history question again. The book is Israel and Civilization. It's available now. Why did the British screw up the mandate so badly? I mean, you did obviously a lot of research to write that chapter. Why did, after Balfour, how could it get so badly screwed up?
It's a fair question. Look, I think it's a question that a lot of contemporary Brits probably should be asking themselves. There, the Middle East is a very chaotic place. Okay, and after World War One, you're already talking about the slow beginning of the end of the British Empire. It obviously had not fully commenced yet. A lot of the possessions in Africa, Middle East, had not fully gone away yet. But you are starting to see kind of this general decadence and this general decline in administration. And then you couple that with the fact that this was also around the time that you start to see really in earnest the rise of a radical Islamist strand of Sunni Islam. This was the era of the rise of the Grand Mufti in Jerusalem, who was a Hitler ally. I mean, there was the Hebron massacre in the second holiest city in all of Judaism, Hebron, there deep in the bowels of Judea back in 1929. So there was a lot going on, unfortunately, when it came to the rise of the very noxious strain of Islam. And that strain of Islam is actually historically different, by the way. Islam did not always hate Judaism and Jewish life, the likes of which the way it did around that time. So this is a kind of a new strain of Islam. Britain was becoming a decadent empire, but yeah, they really screwed it up. They really royally screwed it up. And unfortunately, a lot of the problems in the Middle East today are due to the negligence and decadence of not just the British, but the French as well, because they were really the ones together who orchestrated the Sykes-Picot Agreement in the aftermath of World War One that really kind of drew these arbitrary nation states of Iraq and Syria, which are essentially just fictitious creations of Western map makers and cartologists, really.
So, John, I'm going to close with an observation. I've read two books this week: Israel and Civilization by Josh Hammer, and On Democracies and Death Cults by Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray's subtitle is Israel and the Future of Civilization. Your subtitle is The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. You and Douglas Murray have like zero in common. Do you think, though, the conservative movement writ large, center right to MAGA right, even into the Rand Paul, Tucker Carlson suspicion of foreign entanglements, that they can all gather around the fact that Israel is our strategic ally? What we do in any particular situation depends upon the realism of the moment, but we don't have an ally that is more important to us. You think everyone can agree on that?
Well, Hugh, let me just first say that Douglas is a personal friend. I actually interviewed him in Tel Aviv a little over a year ago, so I'm very pleased to see his book come out as well. And and I applaud him for fighting a very similar fight, of course. I think that anyone who takes a realist approach to U.S. foreign policy should readily concede the fact that Israel is America's obviously, clearly, unambiguously best ally in the Middle East when it comes to containing radical Islamism, when it comes to containing the Islamic Republic of Iran. To me, it is so strikingly obvious that I sometimes fail to see how anyone can reach a different conclusion. Unfortunately, some people do claim to reach a different conclusion there, Hugh, and I'm oftentimes just really scratching my head. There are various kind of starting places where that form of analysis might come from there. I can only speculate there, but I tried the best I could in this book to make the very straightforward case, among other cases that I make, but the very straightforward case that a realist, national interest centric U.S. foreign policy should place Israel at the forefront of its Middle East policy, arguably the forefront really of its global relations as a whole.
And I agree with you. I'm also an optimist, and maybe I'm adding a question because I got 2 extra minutes here. I have a lot of Sunni Arab state friends inside the Beltway. when we're off the record, and I don't often interview them, they're all very pro-Israel because the Sunni states in the Gulf do not want Iran to topple their regime. They are Sunni
Right.
Muslims. They are not Shia Muslims. They are not Wahhabis, though they may have Wahhabis within their population. They are mainstream and reliable allies. I'm optimistic about the Abraham Accords. Are you?
Yeah, I'm actually very optimistic for the very simple reason that none of the countries have actually pulled out since October 7th. Now, look, the Saudis are the big kahuna. I mean, everyone knows that the Saudis are the big kahuna there. You're totally right, though. In private, a lot of these Sunni Arabs, even including many of the high-ranking Saudis, will oftentimes say the right things there. They are still concerned a little bit of the proverbial Arab street. Joe Biden really did absolutely horrific work in this front by mollycoddling the Iranian regime, trying to show that the U.S. could get back again close to Iran. He essentially did his best to destroy the Abraham Accords. Remember, Hugh, he wouldn't even say the term Abraham Accords for the first year and a half of Joe Biden's administration. That's very, very, very telling. But the sheer fact, despite a lot of these nonsensical public proclamations from the official Emirati or Bahraini agency, the mere fact that they are still there, they still have direct flights from Tel Aviv to Manama and Abu Dhabi and so forth there. That is really, really, really important. And frankly, to me, tells me all I need to know. So I'm actually very optimistic about the future of the Abraham Accords.
Well, Josh Hammer, I'm very optimistic about your long career ahead as a public intellectual in the first rank. He is a senior editor at Newsweek, and this book, Israel and Civilization, will open your eyes to a lot of not just Jewish history and American history, but the future. That's what I'm interested in, and Josh does a lot in that regard. Josh Hammer, thank you. Congratulations on the publication of Israel and Civilization.
Thank you so much, Hugh. I appreciate it.